Harold Bennett, an 88-year-old retired university professor, had dedicated his life to studying and teaching architecture at a prestigious university in New York. He had always been a fiercely independent man, proud of his self-sufficiency, and lived in the historic home that he and his wife, Margaret, had chosen together many years ago. But everything changed after Margaret passed away from Alzheimer's disease. In the days following her passing, his once cozy home became unbearably silent. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. He tried to maintain his routine, waking up early, reading the newspaper, making coffee, taking walks around the neighborhood. But there was no one to talk to, no one to share memories with. His son, Michael, a busy attorney in Chicago, could only visit a few times a year. His daughter, Linda, lived in Texas with her family. Both loved their father deeply, but were increasingly worried about his well-being. Their concerns escalated after a harsh winter storm left Harold bedridden with the flu, unable to call for help. That incident was the final straw for Michael. "Dad, you can't live alone anymore. It's time for you to move into a senior living facility where you'll be taken care of." Harold resisted at first. He still believed he could take care of himself. But reality was catching up to him. Every grocery trip left him exhausted. He once forgot to turn off the stove, nearly causing a fire. These small warning signs accumulated, and eventually, he accepted that maybe Michael was right. After months of consideration, Harold agreed to move into Greenwood Senior Living, a high-end retirement community in the suburbs of New York. It was marketed as a second home for seniors, featuring luxurious amenities, swimming pools, a library, communal lounges, and 24/7 medical care. It seemed like an ideal place to spend his remaining years without the burden of daily responsibilities. On the day he left his home, Harold stood at the doorway, taking one last look around. Memories of Margaret flooded his mind. The kitchen where she had cooked warm meals, the garden where they had shared afternoon tea, the old armchair where they had sat for hours reading together. "Am I making the right decision?" he wondered. As he arrived at Greenwood, a young staff member greeted him with a bright smile. Everything looked pristine, well-organized, and exactly as promised. But as the doors closed behind him, a strange feeling crept in, a sense that something was not quite right. And from that very moment, Harold began to suspect that this might not be the place for him. At first, Greenwood Senior Living seemed like everything it had promised to be. Harold's room was spacious, clean, and filled with natural light. The staff was friendly, always greeting him with warm smiles. Meals were served in a beautifully decorated dining hall, where soft classical music played in the background. For the first few weeks, Harold tried to convince himself that this was a good decision. He joined a few group activities, played chess with some of the other residents, and even attended a lecture on American history. His son, Michael, called every few days, always asking, "How's it going, Dad? Do you like it there?" Harold didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. The truth was that, despite the comfortable setting, he felt like a guest in someone else's home. Everything was meticulously scheduled, the times for meals, for exercise, for social activities. Even bedtime seemed pre-decided. There was a quiet but persistent sense of control over everything. He could no longer wake up and make himself coffee at 5 a.m. like he used to. The cafeteria didn't open until 8 a.m. If he wanted to take a walk outside, he had to sign out at the front desk. For safety reasons, they told him. One evening, after finishing dinner, Harold walked back to his room. The hallway was unusually silent. He passed by other residents' doors, some slightly open. He caught glimpses of people sitting alone in their rooms, staring at the walls, or watching television with vacant expressions. It felt lifeless. Later that night, as he was getting ready for bed, he overheard two staff members talking just outside his door. Did you hear about Mrs. Peterson in room 214? Her daughter came to visit today, but she didn't even recognize her. Yeah, it's really sad. I don't know why they don't just put her in memory care already. The conversation sent a chill down Harold's spine. He knew that Greenwood had different levels of care: independent living, assisted living, and memory care. But something about the way they spoke, it felt cold. Like once you became too weak, too dependent, you stopped being a person and became just another patient. A sudden realization hit him. Was this place really a community? Or was it just a waiting room for the end of life? The next morning, Harold decided to go for a walk in the garden. He approached the front desk to sign out. A nurse on duty smiled at him, but hesitated. Actually, Mr. Bennett, we have a rule now that residents shouldn't go out alone, just for safety, but we can have someone accompany you. Harold frowned. He had never needed permission to go outside before. It was a simple walk. Why did they need to monitor him? He felt something deep inside him tighten. As he sat down in the lounge that afternoon, watching residents slowly shuffle past, he wondered, had he lost his freedom in exchange for security? He had always believed that aging meant slowing down, but not stopping. He still had thoughts, ideas, interests. Yet, here he felt like he was being quietly stripped of everything that made him who he was. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a question haunted him. Is this a home or a prison? The days at Greenwood Senior Living started blending together. Every morning, Harold woke up to the same routine. Breakfast at exactly 8 a.m., a short walk through the halls, a scheduled group activity, lunch at noon, then afternoon leisure time in the common lounge. The predictability was suffocating. He tried to break the monotony by sitting in different parts of the facility, hoping for a change of scenery. But it didn't matter where he sat. Everywhere, the air felt heavy with an unspoken reality. Residents shuffled from one designated area to another, their movements dictated by a schedule they had no say in. One afternoon, as he sat near the window, he saw a new resident being escorted in by her son. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly. Her son was talking to the receptionist, filling out paperwork. Harold recognized the look on her face. It was the same expression he had when he first arrived. The realization that she was no longer in control of her own life. Later that evening, Harold went to dinner and sat across from Charles, a retired school principal who had been at Greenwood for almost 2 years. Charles was one of the few residents who still had a sharp mind, though his body had weakened significantly. "I see we have a new guest," Harold said, gesturing toward the woman he had seen earlier. Charles let out a small chuckle. "Guest? That's a polite way to put it. More like an inmate." Harold frowned. "You don't like it here?" Charles shook his head, lowering his voice. "It's not about liking or disliking it. It's about what happens when you live in a place like this long enough. At first, they make you feel like you're in control. Then, little by little, they take away your choices. You can't go outside without permission. You can't eat when you want. You can't even get a cup of coffee in the middle of the night without someone questioning you." Harold felt a chill run down his spine. "But this is supposed to be a community, isn't it?" Charles smirked. "That's what they tell the families. Your loved ones will be safe, comfortable, and cared for. What they don't say is that safety comes at the cost of your independence. People don't leave here unless they're going to a hospital or the funeral home." Harold pushed his plate away, suddenly losing his appetite. He looked around the dining hall. Some residents ate quietly, staring down at their food. Others simply sat in silence, their eyes empty. That night, as Harold walked back to his room, he heard something strange, a quiet crying sound coming from one of the rooms. He paused, unsure of whether he should knock. The sound was muffled, almost as if someone was trying to hide it. As he stood there, frozen in place, a nurse walked by and noticed him. "Everything okay, Mr. Bennett?" she asked with a professional smile. Harold hesitated. I think someone's upset in there. The nurse barely glanced at the door. Oh, that's just Mrs. Lawson. She gets emotional sometimes. Nothing to worry about. She spoke with the kind of forced cheerfulness that made Harold uneasy. As she walked away, Harold stayed where he was, listening to the quiet sobs coming from the room. How many others here felt the same way? How many of them were trapped, just like him? Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he thought about Charles's words. People don't leave here unless they're going to a hospital or the funeral home. Harold had always believed that retirement was supposed to be the golden years of life, a time of rest, reflection, and enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of work. But now he wasn't so sure. Had he unknowingly signed away his freedom? Harold had never been the kind of man to give up easily. He had spent his whole life making decisions for himself, choosing his own path, taking control of his destiny. But now, at 88 years old, he was beginning to wonder if he had unknowingly handed over that control when he moved into Greenwood Senior Living. He started paying closer attention to the small details around him. The way the nurses subtly redirected residents who lingered too long near the front doors. The way certain residents seemed to vanish for days at a time, only to return looking frielier, quieter. The way some staff spoke to them in sing-song voices, as if they were children rather than adults who had once built careers, raised families, and fought wars. One afternoon, as Harold sat in the lounge, flipping through an old newspaper, Charles shuffled over and lowered himself into the chair beside him. You ever wonder why no one here talks about leaving? Charles asked, his voice low. Harold looked around. It was true. No one ever mentioned going back home or moving in with their children. The only people who ever left Greenwood were taken away in an ambulance. I've been thinking about it a lot, Harold admitted, and I don't like the answers I'm coming up with. Charles sighed, rubbing his temple. I tried bringing it up with my daughter last year. I told her I wanted to leave, that I still had some fight left in me. He let a dry laugh. You know what she said? Dad, why would you want to leave? You're safe here. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Harold nodded. That's what my son keeps telling me. Dad, you don't have to do anything. Just relax. Charles shook his head. Relax? That's just another way of saying stay put. They sat in silence for a while, watching as a nurse wheeled an elderly man across the room. The man stared blankly ahead, his mouth slightly open. Harold lowered his voice. Do you think there's a way out? Charles turned to him, eyes sharp. Depends on what you're willing to do. That night, Harold lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thought of spending the rest of his life in Greenwood, following the same routine every single day, made his chest tighten. There had to be another way. The next morning, he made his first move. Instead of heading straight to breakfast like usual, he took a detour toward the administrative office. He had noticed that the main entrance was always locked, but surely the front desk had a way out. As he approached, he saw a staff member behind the desk. Nancy, a woman in her mid-40s who had always been friendly toward him. Good morning, Mr. Bennett, she said with a smile. Can I help you with something? Harold forced a casual chuckle. Yeah, I was just wondering what I need to do if I wanted to leave. Nancy's smile froze for just a second before she quickly recovered. Oh, Mr. Bennett, why would you want to leave? You have everything you need here. He kept his expression neutral. I just like to keep my options open. Hypothetically speaking, Nancy's fingers tapped against the desk. Well, you have to discuss it with your family. Since your son is your emergency contact, you need to approve any major decisions about your residence. Harold felt a cold knot form in his stomach. So I can't just walk out? Nancy gave him a sympathetic look. It's not that simple. We have policies in place to make sure all of our residents are safe. Safe. That word again. As Harold turned away, he realized the truth. He wasn't living in a home. He was living in a system that had no intention of letting him leave. Something had to change, and soon. Harold sat by the window of his small room at Greenwood Senior Living, watching the early morning sunlight stretch across the manicured lawn. For months, he had felt like a prisoner, trapped in a place where he was told what to eat, when to sleep, and how to live. But now he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to spend the rest of his days waiting for time to pass. He was going to leave. But how? His son had control over his residency. The staff monitored every entrance and exit. Even if he tried to walk out, security would stop him before he reached the front gate. That's when an idea struck him. That afternoon, he found Charles sitting in the lounge, staring blankly at the television. "I have a plan," Harold whispered, leaning in. Charles turned his head slightly. "You serious?" Harold nodded. "But I need your help." For the next 2 weeks, they observed everything. The shift changes, the security patterns, the moments when staff were distracted. They discovered that the only time the front doors were left unlocked was during emergency situations, like when an ambulance arrived. "So what? You plan on faking a heart attack?" Charles asked, half joking. "No," Harold said, "but someone else might need medical attention at the right time." A week later, their opportunity arrived. A resident named Mr. Langley had a history of fainting spells. Harold and Charles weren't going to hurt him, but they knew his condition was unpredictable. Sure enough, one morning, Mr. Langley collapsed in the dining hall, sending staff into a panic. Harold and Charles had already positioned themselves near the front desk, watching as an aide rushed to call 911. The doors unlocked. Now or never. With canes in hand, they moved quickly but calmly toward the exit. Harold's heart pounded as they stepped outside, the fresh air hitting his face for the first time in months. They kept walking, past the front gate, past the visitor parking lot. Free. For the first time in a year, Harold felt alive. Harold's escape made headlines. His son was furious at first, but after weeks of arguing, he finally agreed to let his father live independently, with some conditions. Harold moved into a small apartment near his old neighborhood, where he could receive in-home care as needed. Charles, unfortunately, was not as lucky. His children refused to take him in, and without legal authority to make decisions for himself, he was forced to stay at Greenwood. Harold visited him often. "You really did it," Charles said one afternoon, shaking his head with a smile. "You still can too," Harold replied. Charles sighed. "Maybe someday." Harold looked out the window, remembering the months he'd spent trapped in that place. It wasn't a home. It was a holding space for people who had been forgotten. But he had refused to be forgotten. This story is more than just one man's escape. It's a reflection of what aging looks like in America today. How do we treat our elderly? Do we truly give them the dignity and freedom they deserve? What do you think? Have you or a loved one ever experienced something like this? Do you believe senior care facilities should have more accountability? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And before you go, let me ask, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know how different cultures approach aging and elderly care. If this story resonated with you, please support the channel by hitting that like button and subscribing. Your engagement helps bring attention to these important issues. Let's start a conversation. What do we owe our elders? And how can we ensure they live with dignity until the very end? See you in the next video.